Okay, today's passage is from Matthew 5. So you can turn there. You can turn to Matthew chapter 5. And the title is, Who is My Enemy? Okay, so let's all turn to Matthew chapter 5. Okay, remember, I always encourage you, bring your own Bible. And that way, you'll have it right in front of you the whole time. Okay, so the main passage is Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 to 48. All right, I'll read it for us first. Please follow along. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Amen. May God bless the reading of His Word. Okay, so please keep your hand right there. We're going to refer to that throughout the message this morning. Okay, so again, the title is Who is My Enemy, right? Who is my enemy? So in this passage, you'll see it talks about neighbors and it talks about enemies. And of course, it says, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. So who's talking here? Who's speaking? Who's saying, hi everyone, you've heard. It's Jesus, right? So this is part of a very famous passage in Matthew, right? That's called Sermon on the Mount, right? Sermon on the Mount. And it's pretty long. We're just going to go over a short passage today. But basically, it's chapter 5. The Beatitudes are in it. Ask and seek, things about eye for an eye, all these things that you've heard before. How should we pray, right? The Lord's Prayer. These are basically very famous passages, and they're all in the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, so this is part of the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, so I like to give you the answer first, right? So who is my enemy? It's not a person. Your true enemy is not a person. Okay, so right now, turn to the person next to you. Turn to the person and say, you can say good morning, and say, you are not my enemy. Okay, and then you say it back. Say it again. You say it back. You are not my enemy. Okay? Okay, so, and you could do that to anyone. It doesn't matter if you know who the person is, right? The true enemy, we've talked about this a lot. Pastor Ryan brings it up all the time, and so do I. The true enemy is the evil one, Satan, the devil, okay? Evil spirits, demons, okay? That is our true enemy. And Satan is real, okay? But he's not a person, right? But Satan is real and the forces of evil are real. That's our true enemy, okay? Not the person next to you. The person next to you is actually, right now, physically, your neighbor, right? And we should love our neighbors, but it also says you should love your enemy, right? So, Mike, you just said the enemy is Satan. We should love Satan? Like that is, no, we should not love Satan. Okay, that doesn't make sense. We should definitely go against Satan, pray that the forces of evil are away from you and away from yourself, away from your family and away from here. Okay, but we should love our enemies. So the person next to me is not my enemy, but Satan is, right? So this is a little confusing, right? So let me explain, okay? So first, what I want you to do, another thought thing, just think about your neighbor. So at home, no one lives like in a shack somewhere, right? Everyone lives in some neighborhood. Think of your neighbor. Think of a neighbor right now. Okay, just think of a neighbor of your home, right? Where you live, in Tenafly or in Hallworth or in Ridgewood. Okay, think of a neighbor. Okay, everyone has someone in mind? Yes? Okay. Can you describe this? How would you describe this neighbor? How would you describe this neighbor? Okay, Roy, I know you like to call out. So Roy, can you just call out? How would you describe your neighbor? Okay, my neighbor likes to clean his car a lot. Okay, let's just stop right there. Okay, now that might annoy you because he's using all your water pressure or all the suds go into your driveway, or you might think that's cool, or you might think it's just weird. Okay, but that's something you definitely know about your neighbor. Okay, so everyone has a neighbor, right? And I know love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so like, what is this passage talking about? Right? Like, why should I be reminded of that? Right? So let's say Roy really likes cars. Like, that's pretty cool. My neighbor's pretty cool. He washes his car every week, right? Like, that's cool. Shouldn't it be easy to love my neighbor? Right? Like, why do I need to be reminded of this? Right? Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, and where's that passage coming from? But then here it also says love your enemies. Right? Okay, so let me tell you about some of my neighbors. All right? Some of them are lovely. Okay, for example, if you've been to my house, I'm in Englewood Cliffs. Across the street is Wendy and Danny. These are their real names, okay? Wendy and Danny. Wendy also works in the city in the Department of Education. So we talk about the city all the time. We're both public school workers. We bond very quickly. We bought our homes around the same time during COVID. They have cute dogs. They buy our Girl Scout cookies. They contribute to the Thanksgiving food drive. Like everything good. Once I left my garage door open, she texted me. I didn't respond. She even came to close it for me, okay, in the middle of the night, okay? This is like a wonderful neighbor, right? The neighbor behind me, Tony, from Italy. He's from Italy, and he always invites me to come over. Michael, let me show you my garden. And he'll come over because he knows I like gardening, and he'll show me these Campari tomato from Italy, seeds from Italy, right? And then he'll give me some, right? Like, what a great neighbor. Then I'll show him my cucumbers and whatever. That's so cool. The Vanderbeek family, a Dutch family, 3 cute kids. When they moved out, they gave me all their baby stuff because they knew I had babies and their kids were older. They gave me the bike, the baby drum set, the toys, everything. Like, these are wonderful neighbors, right? Like, why do you need to remind me to love them? They're so cool. Because not all neighbors are like that, right? Okay, so now think, I'm sure, did you think of a neighbor that kind of like does weird things or bothers you a little bit? Did you? Do you have a neighbor that's like a little bit, maybe strange? Okay. The neighbors are not always nice, right? Because sometimes they kind of are your enemy, right? So I think people listening in this passage are thinking, okay, Jesus, yes, I can love my neighbor, but Jesus, you don't know my neighbor, okay? My neighbor's like this, and they're terrible. And Jesus is saying, okay, fine, then love your enemy also. So that's what he's referring to, right? Sometimes we think of our neighbors as our enemy, even though they're not, right? Sometimes we think of our neighbor as our enemy because they do all these like terrible things. So they're like, you know what, Jesus, but that's my enemy. I don't need to love them. And Jesus is saying, nope. Even when your neighbor acts like an enemy, or even when you think your neighbor is your enemy, guess what? They're actually still your neighbor, and they're not really your enemy. So you need to love them. You need to love them also. I think the evidence of this is in Luke chapter 10. All right, so in Luke chapter 10, this is a famous passage. It's a parable of the Good Samaritan. And again, Jesus is talking to a person, and that person says, like, oh, Jesus, I know what to do. He answered. Let's read this quote together. Okay, he answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this, and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? Right? It's like, okay, Jesus, you say you love my neighbor, but you don't know my neighbor. Like who's my, do you mean everyone? Right? And by the end of the parable, yes, Jesus does mean anyone because they asked later who the neighbor was, and the one who showed mercy was actually the Samaritan, right? So you know the story, right? It was actually the Samaritan who was kind of their enemy, right? So by the end of this passage, Jesus is saying, everyone's your neighbor, including those who you think is your enemy, right? So he's saying 2 things, like you should love your enemy that are people, but really that person you think is an enemy actually isn't. They're also your neighbor, okay? So even the difficult neighbors that you kind of think are your enemy, you need to love them, right? So that's what the passage is saying here, right? So it's very clear that even your enemy is actually your neighbor. Even if they've hurt you in the past, right? Even though Samaritans have, been against those Jewish people in the past, they're actually your neighbor, right? So if you go back to the passage, right? So that's kind of like the compare and contrast here, right? So love your neighbor, but in the red, it's like, oh, you've also heard hate your enemy. Maybe hate your enemy is not in the Bible, but maybe they've heard that just like among their culture, okay? But I tell you, love your enemies, right? So later in the Bible, other passages say, like, resist the devil, like get away from the devil, right? But love your enemies. So it's not saying love the devil, okay? It's saying love the people that you think or act like enemies to you, but they're actually your brothers and sisters. They're actually your neighbor, people that God also really loves, right? That's really what it's trying to say, okay? So like, why do I need to be reminded to love my neighbor? Because I need to hear that too. Because that Dutch family, that cute Dutch family that gave me all their stuff, even then, they had a son who used a real bow and arrow and shot an arrow into the side of our house, okay? And almost hit my dad, actually, okay? So even though they're so nice, they do annoying things too, okay? And then when they moved away, 2021, when they moved away, a new family moved in. And they did not have cute little Dutch kids, okay? And I won't use the real name, okay? But they had big parties, this new family, with loud music at night. The cars during the parties partially blocked my driveway, okay? So like little annoying things. And then there's another neighbor that I didn't mention who is to the right, so not Wendy, not Tony, okay? Who for some reason always criticizes my landscaping. That the bushes are growing over to their side and touching their trees and taking their water away. And I'm killing their trees, okay? And for some reason, he also always takes the lid of my garbage can and thinks it's his own and puts it on his own. I'm like, why does he do that? Every time I take it back, 2 days later, he takes it again. That's so weird, okay? So these, I need to love them, even though they're a little harder to love, okay? They are not my true enemy. They're my neighbor, all right? Physically speaking, and in terms of like human sense, they are my neighbor. I'm supposed to love them. So we need to be reminded of that. Even though they bother us, and even though their dog comes over and digs holes in my yard, and sometimes leaves a little other mess in my yard too, okay? That has happened several times, all right? But still, I need to love them. I need to love them, okay? Now, if you look at the passage right before that, right? So you're in Matthew chapter 5. Look at the passage like right before that, right? This is right before that, okay? Again, still from the Sermon on the Mount, right? But I tell you, Jesus is still talking, right? Jesus, I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you, so this is where you hear, turn the other cheek, right? Go the extra mile, right? If anyone wants to sue you, hand them your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles, right? Give to the one who asks you. Do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you, right? So if someone forces you to go 1 mile, right? That would be like a Roman soldier who was their enemy, okay? Go with them 2 miles, right? So it's saying you should love these people. It says, do not resist an evil person, okay? So, yes, we should resist the devil. We should resist evil forces. We should pray that those are gone, okay? But this says, do not resist an evil person, right? So the person is your neighbor. Okay, the person is your neighbor, and you can show love to them. And these are some examples of like radical ways to show love to them, right? So Jesus is talking about people who are not your true enemy. Okay, all right. Satan is a true enemy, and sometimes Satan might trick you and make you go against a person who you think is your enemy. But the true enemy is Satan, not a person, and definitely not the person right next to you right now. Okay? So someone who disagrees with you, the coworker who always shooting your ideas down in the meeting in front of the boss, okay? The classmate that's just always annoying you or maybe makes fun of you because you're a Christian, right? These people are not your enemy, right? Instead, they're opportunities. God has put them there for some reason, right? They're God's opportunities to love, to be kind, to exercise grace, to spread the gospel, to challenge you to grow. God has put them there in your life, even though it's very challenging and very inconvenient, right? As inconvenient as that sounds, They're there for a reason. They are there for a reason, right? So again, if you look at the passage, right, he causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, sends rain on righteous and the unrighteous, right? Like God knows there's people that annoy you, okay? God knows there are people that persecute you. Those are definitely people that are not even your religion, right? And then later it says, if you greet only your own people, right? So it's saying you should greet more than just your own people, right? So those are people of different culture, different background, different nationality, right? So it's about everyone. It's not just about, okay, my neighbor is someone who's also at this church and also Christian, also Chinese, and like, oh yeah, it's easy to love them. Although we know even that makes it hard to love, right? There are people who are just like you that are also very hard to love, right? But they are not your enemy. Okay? They are not your enemy. And by loving those who seem unseemly, by loving the people who are like wronging you, you're actually being like God. You're carrying God's goodness. Like you are like carrying the torch for God, right? Like you're embodying God's goodness as he does and sends his common grace on everyone, right? The sunshine. Here it mentions the sunshine. The rain, right? Remember, gravity, oxygen, right? Cellular respiration, okay? All these things are for everyone. They're for good people. They're for evil people, right? God gives them to all people. So shouldn't we love all people too? Yes, we should, right? So that's kind of what this passage, is saying. And I need to hear it too, right? Because let's face it. Oh, it's so hard to love my neighbor, right? The one who, keeps playing loud music and annoying me. But don't you think sometimes they find it hard to love you, right? Aren't you the bad neighbor sometimes, right? So I need to be reminded of this too, because a lot of times, let's face it, I'm not always the good neighbor either, okay? Because my yard is overgrown, okay? And my trees do touch the other side. And a lot of times, I do compost, right? Like rotten food you put outside, bury and make soil. I don't do the compost properly, and sometimes I'm just throwing bones out there, right? So no wonder the dog comes over and tries to dig holes, okay? Because that's actually probably my fault, right? And they're probably like, why is Mike always throwing stuff out? They're tempting my dog and they're eating the rotten food, right? So don't you want them to forgive you also, right? Don't you want them to forgive me when the guy who steals my trash can lid, my kids every day on the way to school are walking all over his lawn, right? And ruining his lawn. Sorry, like my twins are walking all over his lawn, right? So I'm sure I'm not a good neighbor either. So don't I want them to be gracious with me? So I should be gracious with them. And of course, that leads us to the golden rule. What's the golden rule? Right? Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. That's also from the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, a few chapters later in chapter 7, that's from this. Okay, Jesus is saying that, and that is from chapter 7, which is also part of this long sermon, Sermon on the Mount, right? So in everything, do to others what you would also have them do unto you, for this sums up the law and the prophets, right? That's known as the golden rule. That is from this long passage, right? Because I need to love my neighbor. They're actually not my enemy. Oh, and I really hope that they don't treat me like their enemy either. Because you know what? I've messed up a lot too, right? And when you have that attitude, like, that makes everything better, right? That makes everything better. And it's the way that people can show grace to each other and show love to each other and show the love of God and the gospel to each other, even though they annoy you, even though they might not even be Christian, right? That's the whole point. That's the whole point. Okay, so let's go there. Okay, right, so where does the passage come from? It's from Leviticus 19. Okay, you don't have to turn there, just look at the screen. So from the Old Testament, Leviticus has a bunch of laws, right? It has a bunch of laws. So do not pervert justice, do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Do not go spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I'm the Lord, right? It's like reminding you, I'm God. I'm telling you to do this because you know what? I spared your lives too. Because you have disobeyed me, but I have spared your lives, Israelite people. Okay, so you need to love your neighbors also. All right? Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so you will not share in their guilt. And here it comes. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. Right? I'm the Lord. Right? So, like, why would I need to be reminded to love my neighbor? They're so lovely. Right? So remember, if it's written in the Bible, it probably was happening, right? So do not seek revenge. People were seeking revenge on their neighbors. People were treating them unfairly and perverting justice, right? So the Jewish people were doing that to their own people, right? But also to foreigners. And God is saying, no, but love your neighbor as yourself, right? And then Jesus takes it a step further, right? Also love your enemies, the ones that you think are your enemies, but they're actually your neighbors, right? But I think it's implied here too, that your neighbors, you might think they're enemies, right? You might bear a grudge against them, but you actually should love them, okay? You actually should love them. Okay, so let's talk about a real life example. All right, so this, I'm probably going to continue next time too, but this is a lady called Corrie ten Boom. All right, so who's heard of Corrie ten Boom before? Excellent. Okay, Pastor Ryan has mentioned him several times. And this is a book. It's called The Hiding Place. And it has like a double meaning. So like, Lord, you are my hiding place. But also literally in their home, they had a hiding place. Okay, they had a hiding place in their home to hide Jewish people during World War II. Okay, so you know, Mike, I was not a history major, but for some reason I keep talking about history. Okay, you know, Mike likes to talk about history, so yeah, just a little background. Here's the book. You can get it easily. I think there's an online version. Also, there's a movie. I think there's 2 different movies. So a lot of kids, like, you don't read the book anymore, right? Just watch the movie. I guess you could do that. There's a YouTube version also. Okay. Anyway, so. Her name's Corrie ten Boom. All right. Anytime you hear like a van something or a ten something, they're from Holland. Okay. Just like my neighbors. All right. My neighbors were Van der Eyck. All right. So here is, speaking of Dutch people. So Dutch people are from Holland. That's also known as what country? The Netherlands. Okay. It took me I didn't understand that until I was like 25. Okay. So Holland is the Netherlands, yet you call them Dutch. Okay. So these are all the same people. Okay, these are all the same people. They were Christians, very devout Christians. Her brother was even a minister, the father, very devout Christian. They grew up in a neighborhood called Haarlem in the Netherlands. Okay, so of course there's also a Haarlem in Manhattan, but if you remember, who settled Manhattan a long time ago? The Dutch. Okay, it was called New Amsterdam, wasn't it? Right, so there's a lot of Dutch names all over the place, right? Westerveld, Stuyvesant, Van this, Ten Eyck, you'll see them everywhere around here. Okay, Frelinghuysen. All right, these are all Dutch names. Okay, she assisted the Dutch underground in going against the Germans, right? Going against the Nazis, in hiding the Jews, and she probably helped. The estimation was she helped 800 Jews, maybe just herself and her family. Not all hiding at once. Like once in a while, hide 6, then send them there, right? Hide another 4, then send them there. Okay, so it's like the cycle that went on for maybe 3 years. She had a father. Her mother died at an early age. Her father and 4 siblings, also very devout Christians, who also participated in helping Jewish people, which was hiding them, but also taking ration cards for food and doing a lot of stuff to help them move them to safe houses and things like that. Okay, so that's Corrie ten Boom. All right, so let's look at a little background, okay? 1944, finally she was caught, right, and spent time in 3 prisons, 2 of which were in the Netherlands, but one of them was Ravensbrück. It was a concentration camp in Germany, Ravensbrück. Have you heard of Ravensbrück? All right, there's many concentration camps. Some of them were like death camps. This wasn't a death camp, but let me tell you, a lot of people still died in it. Okay, so this camp was specifically for women, and basically they would just work them. They would work them, and a lot of them were not Jewish, actually. A lot of them were just like traitors, okay, slash like political prisoners, right? So it's like, oh, you're against Nazis? We don't like you. Sending you to the camp. right? So it's like a terrible time in Europe. And they kind of saw this coming, but she wasn't sent to the prison until 1944 and spent almost a year in prison. About 3 months were in Ravensbrück, okay? Terrible conditions, all right? The famous designer, Christian Dior, his sister actually went to Ravensbrück. She was French, and she, same thing, went against the Nazi regime, and she was sent to Ravensbrück, okay? And there's this TV show about that on Apple TV, if you're interested about that, okay? But a famous women's concentration camp, she was there. Her sister died there while she was there, okay? Basically emaciated and sick, and died there. And she was released around 1945, and of course the war ended in 1945, okay? Again, a devout Christian. Here's a picture. This would be from like the 1920s, I guess. Okay, there's a family picture. Again, like I said, right, father and 4 other siblings. I think one of them is the aunt. One of them is the aunt here. Okay, so this is later in life. She is showing the place. So the house, they kind of preserved it. And I don't know if this is the real one, but this is like a replica of the hiding place, which is actually like this fake brick wall that they made. And right there, the brick wall opening, that wasn't really open. They're just showing you that like people could go behind it, right? And then later, she went around the world to speak and preach a message of forgiveness and reconciliation. She went to help mentally disabled, but also went to speak to people who were in the camps, including the guards, including like the bad people, right? Including the bad guys, okay? Including the guards. And she really embodied this message of love your enemy, because she realized that those people, even though they were like the guards, were actually not her enemy. They were actually people too that God loved. And that's such a hard, difficult like pill to swallow, right? That's such like a difficult message to preach and to embody. But that's what she did. She went around and she had trouble doing that at first, but actually her sister, like Betsy, her sister, was like the one who told her all, and Betsy, she thinks, so it sounds like she's the nicest person in the world. She says Betsy was actually the nicest person in the world who taught her this message of forgiveness. And even though Betsy died in the camp, right, some of her last words were about Jesus and forgiveness. And it's just like an amazing story, okay? I'll read just like a few passages from it, okay? Again, not spend too much time on it. Let's just... Okay, so I'll just read here. So later they were in Ravensbrück, right? So the knitters of Barracks 28 became the praying heart of the vast diseased body that was Ravensbrück, interceding for all the camp, guards under Betsy's prodding, as well as prisoners. We prayed beyond the concrete walls for the healing of Germany, of Europe, of the world, as Mama had once done from the prison of a crippled body. Right? So like that doesn't sound like a bitter person, right? This sounds like a gracious person who and they were praying for Germany? Like Germany was the enemy, right? But they knew like something was wrong. And a lot of people in Germany were being tricked, and they knew there were believers in Germany, right? So they're praying for the enemy because those were not really their enemy, they realized. These are people that God also loves, and they know one day the war will end, right? And we're going to have some reconciliation. And we're going to have some kind of love towards everyone and forgiveness and the spreading of the gospel even to the Germans, right? So while they were in the camp, amazing things, right? And I'll share it more next time. But amazing thing happened while they were in the camp, and they had a Bible that they kind of like snuck in, and they were holding like Bible studies at night with the prisoners, and they spread the gospel to prisoners. They also showed love to the guards in different ways. And there's this one passage where I think it was like a Jewish person or someone was like getting beat, right? And then Betsy, her sister Betsy, said like, "Oh, I feel so sorry for that person," right? That person like that was getting beat, right? But Betsy actually meant the guard. She felt so sorry for the guard, that German guard that had this hatred, that had this like maybe got brainwashed and had this hatred in their heart. And Betsy actually like prayed for the guard, okay, who was like the enemy. right? Because she realized it's not actually the enemy, right? The true enemy is Satan, who, again, we'll talk about this next time, like who really like kind of messed up the Nazi party, right? And they had all these like connection to occult things, okay? So Satan is the true enemy who really like messed up that country, not the people, all right? Not the people themselves. So here's just a little map, right? So if you look, right, so there's Germany. This is the beginning of World War II, right? So France wasn't like occupied yet. Soon France fell also, okay? Then there was like Dunkirk, they had to evacuate and all that, right? Netherlands is like right next to Germany, right? So it was like easy pickings, okay? So Germany went in, Netherlands at the time, I guess they always had a strong navy, right? They took over like a lot of things back in the 1700s, 1600s, but their army was very weak, okay? There's a chapter that talks about the invasion. They fell in like 4 days, okay? In like 4 days, Netherlands was fallen, and then they got occupied, right? They got occupied for 4 years, and within that, Corrie ten Boom and the family was like secretly helping Jewish people, protecting them, but also going against the Nazi German guards and soldiers that were there. Okay, so that's kind of the context of that. Okay, this is Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is the World Holocaust Remembrance Center. Anyway, the Yad Vashem Day was recent. It was on April 24th. It was the 80th anniversary. But anyway, if you look in here, Corrie ten Boom is mentioned here. So they have something called Righteous Among the Nations. Basically, they want to remember the Holocaust, but they also want to honor those who helped hide the Jewish people and who helped that were not Jewish themselves, that were in other countries. And Corrie ten Boom is definitely listed. Her whole family is listed in here also. Okay, so we'll talk about them next time. Okay? All right, so like, what's the deal, right? Like, why should I love my enemy, right? Because remember, God loved us first. God loved us first, right? So truly, again, our enemy is like Satan, right? But as sinners, we are really God's enemy, okay? We are really God's enemy, and thanks be to God that He loved us while we were still sinners, right? This is Romans chapter 5. You see, at just the right time when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die, but God demonstrates His own love in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since we have now been justified by His blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through Him? For if, while we were God's enemies, this is actually the same word, we were reconciled to Him through the death of His Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through His life? Right? While we were God's enemies, He loved us. Right? Imagine that, like God only loved the people that were like Him. Then He would love, the Trinity, Jesus and the Holy Spirit, and that's it. We would not have salvation. He would not love anyone. He would not give us Jesus. He would not send His own Son to die for us. Right? So definitely, we love those as God loved us first. Right? Because really, we were like the enemies to God. Right? We're the enemies to God. And the last one, in John 15, right? My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Right? And this each other is all your neighbors, including enemies. Right? Greater love has none than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I've made known to you. Right? So a couple of things implied here. Number one, someone will lay down their life for one's friends. Jesus is talking to His disciples. He's saying, you are my friends. Right? So they're supposed to make the connection. Okay, Jesus will lay down His life for friends. Jesus called me a friend. So Jesus is going to lay down His life for me. Right? You're supposed to put two and two together. That's what the disciples were supposed to think. Right? But remember, the disciples, they were a little slow, a little dense. Right? They didn't quite get that because a few hours after this, all the disciples ran away and betrayed Him and were ashamed of Him. Right? They didn't act like friends. Right? But Jesus loved them and He called them friends, even though they acted like His enemies. Right? Even though they acted like His enemies. Okay, so that's my main message of today, right? So again, just to sum up, we should love our enemies as ourselves. It says, love your neighbor as yourself, even those who we think are our enemies, because they're not actually our enemy. Okay? Turn to your neighbor again and say, you are not my enemy. You are not my enemy. Okay? The true enemy is the evil one. Okay? We should not love the evil one. Okay? But we should love our neighbors, even though we think they're enemies. Okay? So love your enemy as yourself because they're actually your neighbor. Love your enemies. Love your neighbors as yourself. Love your enemies as yourself. Okay? These are people that God loves. And while we were God's enemy, He loved us. He loved us. Okay, so let's try this song. Let's close with this song. We're just going to sing the chorus. Please rise. Let me get a drink of water. Okay, we'll just sing the chorus and the bridge. All right, this is from a longer song called Sea of Victory, and it talks about the true enemy, right? So God takes what the true enemy, the devil, meant for evil, but turns it for good. All right, so I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory.